And there they are on draft day, live from Green Bay. Site of it all. Ryan Clark, Mina Kimes. Morning, guys. How we doing?
Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
I was going to rock that shirt today.
Which one?
In that color. But I saw Ryan on Get Up this morning, and I said my brother would look better than me in that shirt. I can't do that to myself today, so I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
You got to wait to see what I got on later, though.
Okay. Oh, you know I'm going to be looking.
Wait till
Oh,
later.
you know I'm going to. Oh, you better represent.
Wait till later.
You better represent. I'm going to be talking about you.
RC.
You better represent.
RC, give us a hint real quick. What color are you going?
Oh, I'm going blue. I'm going blue. I got a navy vest, and then I got the checkerboard up top.
She asked you what color, bro. She didn't ask you to give her all the information.
It's called a tease in this business.
Tease. You got to tease, Mr. Pivot. You got to pivot to the tease.
Oh, my gosh. Hi, Mina. All right, let's go, guys. ESPN's Field Yates released his final mock draft heading into tonight's draft.
Ooh.
Yates has Shedeur Sanders falling again, and the Browns making the trade back into the first round to take Sanders with the 29th pick of the draft. Okay. What?
Come on, Mina. Help me out here. He's 29 now, Mina. He's 29th now, Mina. Come on, girl. Come on.
Steve, you know, we talked about this in L.A. in the commercial break. I want him to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 21, which weeks ago would have been perceived as an incredible fall, and now we're talking about 29. But I see that as being a great fit for both sides. From Sanders' perspective, you know, typically when quarterbacks are drafted in the first round, they end up in lackluster situations. That's not the case here. It'd actually be a great situation for him. We saw Pittsburgh is a playoff team, obviously. They are the closest to being the, quote, quarterback away team. You know, some issues on the offensive line, but I think they're trending in the right direction, particularly on the interior. Trade for DK Metcalf after Ward, who's my quarterback one. He's accurate, he's tough, throws the ball over the middle of the field, throws with anticipation. So I view that marriage as making a lot of sense, certainly a lot more sense than anything else I imagine Pittsburgh would do at that point.
RC?
Yeah, and what's wild about it, Stephen A., like, I get what you're saying, too, right? It's like he's the 29th pick. Now, right, he's a guy that when the evaluation process started in January, we were speaking, okay, who's going to go first at the quarterback position? Will it be Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? And very quickly, that separation seemed to be made, but it felt like Shedeur Sanders was number 2, and he was a first-round draft pick, and that's exactly what it was going to stay throughout this process. And that's changed. And when you hear whether it's Adam Schefter, whether it's Field Yates, Mel Kiper, Peter Schrager now who works with us, when they start to put out these mock drafts close to the draft day, it's because of what they're hearing on the phone, not because of what they believe on the tape. So somewhere in this process, teams have thought differently of Shedeur Sanders than many of us did at the end of the season. But what we have to get out of our mind is that first mock draft or that first conversation we have, that's just all conjecture. That's all us trying to be prophets and say this is exactly what we see happening in 3 months. If this is where he is, I'm with Mina. Sometimes you can fall to a better situation, and in being drafted, it's not when you're drafted, it's where you're drafted to, who you're going to play with, and I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers is that place.
Fair enough, and I believe it as well. No doubt about it. I hope he ends up with the Pittsburgh Steelers, please. But that doesn't negate what's transpiring. So when we see the skepticism that has been thrown in the direction of Shedeur Sanders, right? And we wonder how that may impact his draft status. Somebody just reminded me that sometimes that's done on purpose because people who covet you have a lower pick and they're trying to manipulate you falling so you can end up in their hands. That's not beyond the realm of comprehension in the National Football League. And if that's the case, although I don't like it, I would understand it better as opposed to what my primary concern is, which is Deion Sanders being who he is, knowing football the way he does, being as accomplished as he is, having the kind of impact on his son as a father, having the inside context in the National Football League. Somebody might be looking at that situation and saying, we don't want to deal with that prospect. And that negatively affects Shedeur Sanders. I would find that incredibly unfortunate and unfair to that kid and the primetime Deion Sanders, but I ain't ruling out that as a possibility either, y'all.
All right, Mina, I want to ask you this. So Adam Schefter reported earlier this morning that the Broncos have fielded calls in recent days from teams interested in potentially moving up to their 20th pick, and that's right before the Steelers at 21. What do you make of that?
You know, I find that a little puzzling. We've been talking about which teams might trade back up into the first round to take one of these quarterbacks, and the Giants and the Browns, teams picking at the top of the draft, are the ones that have come to mind. Outside of them, though, Ryan, there's no one else really that makes sense to me. And both those two teams, I do think it's a possibility that they looked at the top of the draft and they said, there are two generational players potentially in this draft, in Hunter and Carter. We have to take them, but we also need quarterbacks. Let's see if we can move back up. But outside of those, again, speaking of the Browns and the Giants, Ryan, can't really think of another team. I know the Saints are one that are being discussed, but I just don't see that happening. How about you?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, you look at, I think it's those three teams, right? If you're the New Orleans Saints and you like one of these quarterbacks, whether it's Shedeur or Jackson Dart, but you don't like them at number 9, maybe you do fight up to get to 20 because you don't know if the Steelers would select Shedeur or Jackson Dart if he's your favorite. And obviously the two teams in Cleveland and New York as well. Molly, if it's okay, I want to go back to something Stephen A. said about the Deion Sanders effect, though.
Please.
Here is what I do believe that, though. See, like Eli Manning, right? We knew that Archie Manning would interfere in some way because the Manning family said that Eli wasn't going to the West Coast and play. They didn't have to infer. They didn't have to project. They didn't have to say to themselves, okay, will the Manning family be involved in Eli's process in any way? They didn't have to do that because they showed you. They told you. They manipulated. They maneuvered to make sure Eli Manning was in New York. But for New York, whether it was the Manning name, whether it was the way Archie and Peyton were perceived, respected, the way they were digested, that was okay for that family. And maybe it was the fact that they thought Eli Manning was so talented, a future Hall of Famer, that they would say to themselves, it doesn't matter if this family would interfere. Or there's an actual issue with Deion Sanders, and I think at some point as well, Mina, Molly, Stephen A., we are going to have to accept also Shedeur may not be that physically gifted to people. Right. I'm not saying he can't play the position. I'm not saying he can't do all of these things that makes playing the quarterback position at a high level extremely possible. But when you watch him, they may not feel, hey, even if Deion interferes, it's okay because he's Patrick Mahomes. And I think that can be a part of what we're hearing throughout this process as well.
I want to be very clear to you and Mina. Under no circumstances am I challenging anything the both of you are saying. That goes for Dio and Swagger as well. Not challenging that. What I'm saying is what we saw over the last several weeks wasn't what you just highlighted. It was attitude, arrogance, entitlement. That's what we were hearing. I'm like, what's up with that? Like, if you're not physically gifted enough, we can tell. When you say Cam Ward going number 1 and you say he has physical gifts that you simply can't teach and Shedeur Sanders doesn't have that, nobody arguing with that.
Yeah, but you're right. That wasn't the conversation.
That was not the conversation.
Yeah.
And so because that wasn't the conversation, that's what makes what y'all do that much more important. Because to me, Ryan, what you just said has made it worse. Why? What I'm saying is what you just highlighted about those physical gifts or lack thereof and how that may be impacting, that probably is what is impacting his slippage in terms of the draft status, right, from months ago. My point is the truth is enough. What's all that other stuff? Where'd that come from?
Stephen A., yeah, but remember, I was on the show earlier, right, and everybody wanted to be upset on Twitter because I was said the confidence, right? The ability to stand up and say, this is who I am. The ability to stand up and say, this is not only who God has made me to be, but this is what I have been preparing for my entire life from a young black man is sometimes difficult for people who cover this game. Let me be very clear, not for people who actually analyze what the player is doing on the field, not for the executives that work in the office and say, okay, when I look at this player and what I see from the X's and O's, what I see from the professionalism, from the maturity, from a standpoint of this young man has never been in trouble. We watched a guy get drafted #1 overall who was arrested on the street for being drunk. We watched a guy go 22nd to the Cleveland Browns, who a documentary comes out later on in life saying that he was all of these things, and we didn't hear this about him during his pre-draft process. It has been a very different situation from the anonymous sources that have come out about Shedeur Sanders. And there is something that's more deeply rooted outside of the football field that's playing into that. And I would never come on here, Stephen A., and say you're wrong for feeling that way, because I feel the exact same way about the way this man has been portrayed in the public throughout the media.
Mina?
Yeah, I think it's tricky here because a lot of the legitimate criticism about his play, and we've talked about it a lot in NFL Live, and how that plays perhaps a role in him dropping, is now being kind of conflated with some of the, I think, unfair criticism about his character, his personality, what he's doing in interviews. And it's almost like some of those critiques are hiding behind the play. I mean, there was a quote from, I believe it was an anonymous coach or assistant coach that was going around this week talking about how awful he was in interviews and this and that, and also saying he wasn't even close to being as good as Jackson Dart last year. I'm sorry, that's not true. Like that, and I've been critical of her as a prospect. Like that's an inaccurate assessment of the tape. Yeah. It is, right, Ryan? But it feels like, okay, you're using the tape almost to hide or to cover up these other critiques. And man, I just wish we could talk about him as a football player, because he's an interesting prospect to discuss. Yeah. And there are legitimate critiques. There really are. And this other stuff to me is just noise.
And by the way, for people that'll get uncomfortable because people sit there and see Deion Sanders and his son, and then you might bring up race or whatever. That's why I brought up Bill Belichick. Because I said, how come he didn't get a job in the NFL? He's a 6-time champion as a head coach, 8 championships overall, 11 trips to the Super Bowl, for crying out loud. And the man, 10 Super Bowl trips, and the man could not get a head coaching job. Why? Because it's really not about that. What it is about is people in positions of influence within the National Football League, these teams, and they want to make sure that they can run their ship the way that they want to with relative impunity, not being criticized, not being critiqued and dissected from those who know. It's one thing for Stephen A. to come at you because of what I see and I don't know, or I might speculate about this. It's another thing entirely if Bill Belichick is critiquing an NFL team. If primetime Deion Sanders is critiquing an NFL team, when they come talking, you might not want that smoke, which is why you don't want to. You perceive them as a problem, rather. That's all I'm saying.
I think the bottom line that we all agree on is if he's dropping or falling because of his talent, that's fine.
Recently, there was speculation that the Minnesota Vikings might sign free agent cornerback Asante Samuel Jr., but now a shocking update has completely changed the outlook. After a serious injury that significantly affected him last season, Samuel's chances of joining the Vikings seem to be fading. In this video, we bring you all the details about what's happening with this veteran player and how it impacts the Vikings' plans. Before diving into the details of the situation with Asante Samuel Jr., it's important to highlight that the Minnesota Vikings had already started making significant moves in their secondary. The team renewed Byron Murphy Jr.'s contract, which was a key piece to maintaining a solid defense. However, the departures of Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin have left a gap that has yet to be filled. This leads us to wonder, how will the potential absence of Samuel affect the Vikings' long-term plans? The neck and shoulder injury that Asante Samuel Jr. suffered last season remains a major hurdle in his career. While he was a standout player during his time with the Los Angeles Chargers, the impact of this injury kept him out of 13 games, which has reduced his ability to generate interest in the free agent market. Mike Garafolo from NFL Media revealed that Samuel is still dealing with symptoms from the injury, making it nearly impossible for him to join the Vikings this offseason. This detail complicates his chances of being signed, leaving Minnesota with few options on the market. What do you think about Asante Samuel Jr.'s situation? Do you think the Vikings should take a risk and sign him despite his injury, or would it be better for them to focus on other options? How do you think this issue will affect Minnesota's defense next season? Leave us your thoughts. We'd love to hear your opinion on this topic and how you see the situation for the team. Now that we understand the impact of Samuel's injury and how it has affected the Vikings, it's time to address what really matters. What happens with the future of Minnesota's secondary, and how are they reacting to this situation? Let's take a look at how the Vikings are adjusting their plans in response to this reality. The Minnesota Vikings had high hopes of bringing in Asante Samuel Jr. to strengthen their secondary, but complications from his injury have put those expectations on hold. The latest update from Mike Garafolo makes it clear that the chances of Samuel joining the Vikings in 2025 are very low. In light of this situation, the team will need to redirect its efforts toward other free agents and potential trades, as has been discussed in recent days. This situation drastically changes the outlook for Minnesota's defense, which is already looking for alternatives to reinforce their cornerback group. The absence of Asante Samuel Jr. could have significant repercussions on the Vikings secondary, an area that was already in the process of restructuring. Samuel's injury leaves a gap that will be difficult to fill, especially considering that Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin won't be returning. This forces Minnesota to focus more on other options, such as signing Jeff Okudah and the return of Mekhi Blackmon after his recovery. Additionally, the Vikings could be considering further improving their cornerback group in the NFL draft. The decisions they make in this regard could be crucial for the team's defensive stability. What do you think about the current situation with the Vikings secondary? Do you think the roster changes in Minnesota will seriously affect their defensive performance next season? Should they continue searching for a veteran cornerback, or trust their internal options like Mekhi Blackmon? Share your opinion in the comments. We'd love to know how you see the future of this important unit for the Vikings. Don't forget to stay tuned for more updates on the Vikings and all the latest from the NFL. With so many important decisions ahead, this team could be about to make big moves. See you in the next video to keep you up to date on everything you need to know. Don't miss it.